Today we're talking about your hanging baskets and planters and why some of them just aren't looking so good. Kind of like this guy right here. Okay, it's towards the later end of July of 2023, and we've just been getting pelted with really humid weather, overcast weather, and then lots of rain. In the last few days, we started to dry out, but as we start looking around, 4th of July is come and gone. We put our planters out, we put our flower boxes out. All of a sudden, a few weeks later, they're just not looking anywhere near as colorful and as nice as they were when we first put them out, say a month or so ago. And the reason for that, in my experience, is all this dreary weather. It's too much or too little water. Most of us, it is the biggest killer of most plants in general, is always, in my experience, too much or too little. Are there other factors, insects, soil conditions, everything? Absolutely. But most homeowners kill their plants with love or neglect. And let's take a closer look. So this is my vermilionaires that are my hummingbird attractors, and I was actually playing around with some fuchsia. But between the busyness around the holidays and one rainstorm after another, we really weren't paying that close of attention. And this is what happens. Now, the reality is there enough life in this plant to save back? Yes, if I was looking for a challenge, but this one will get discarded. But this one here, it's just, you can see some yellow leaves. I had some salvia in here that just did not. This was kind of just like a hummingbird experiment. So we jammed in a few verbena just because we like the color. But we had some salvia in there, some hummingbird salvia, and then the vermilionaire. These like it hot and dry. And the salvias are right in between. But this is what I'm looking at. The soil itself is just riddled with decaying plant material, and it's easier to see in here. This soil is black. But a lot of us, when we're really good at paying attention to it, what we're doing is we just get on a routine. Every Monday, every Tuesday, or every day when summer hits. Every day I've got to hit it. If this weather was hot and dry and we hadn't seen a lick of rain in a month, yes, in the summertime, many times, if this plant was nice and big and full, I'd have to water this plant every day. The problem is these pots weren't drying out. And they just were getting a little too much water. And at the same time, the rain that we were getting was keeping them constantly moist. And then we get a few days of dry weather in between, but it was cloudy and humid. So again, not drying out. Once a plant starts hitting the death spiral, they stop drying out in general because the plant's not pulling up all the water. And so a lot of times what happens, we start seeing this all over the bottom. Sometimes it's diseases, sometimes it's insects. But from the amount of properties I'm going to these days, it's really just the fact that maybe we had two plants that like different conditions. 100% in here, this plant likes a little bit, this salvia likes a little bit more water than the vermilionaire. This definitely likes it hot and dry. So it's been tolerating the moisture, but it's definitely not flourishing as well as this is usually riddled in flowers nonstop. So I can tell it's just plain not happy. If you look around your planters and you're looking around at different hanging baskets, and this conversation is mostly for anything in containers, there could be one or two plants that are just not liking those conditions. And the key is to take your finger, stick it into the soil, and if it's dry 2 inches down, then it's probably time to water. And keep in mind, you can never water too much at one time. If you put 2 gallons of water inside a flower pot, probably a gallon's coming out the bottom. You never can do it, but you can water too frequently. And that's what's happening here. The rule of thumb with all plants, in my experience, is you water to the point of saturating the soil, and then you stop watering until the plant needs it. And so that's getting used to. Most of us, we need a routine. We need a schedule to get on, so we try to keep that schedule. But Mother Nature has her own schedule. So the best thing to do is to kind of just stick your hand down in that soil. If it's dry a couple inches down, then it's probably safe to water that plant. If it's damp and you pull the top ½ inch of soil off and you see that it's nice and dark and black in it, that plant doesn't want water yet. Now, if we were in the 90s and the plant was big and lush and full, some, like petunias, they could dry out. They could look like that in the morning, and by 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, if there's a stiff breeze, they could be dry. Now, other plants like that vermilionaire that likes it hot and dry, it may take a little bit longer. It could go in a day and a half sometimes without getting water. So that's why you want to put not just plants that look good together, but plants that like the same conditions. And what I mean by that is some plants just like wet feet. Some plants really like dry feet. So how frequently we water is dependent on what plants are growing in those pots. And so that you have to do your own little research because every combination. But when you're buying combinations or creating combinations, that's why you want to really pay attention to what you're putting together and not just look for growth habit and flower colors, but to make sure that it's the conditions, because some plants may need that water every day because they just plain dry out fast. Other plants may need a lot less. But if you keep watering and keep their feet wet, they're going to start looking like those. And so we should probably talk about what to do about it. Now, if I had something like this and I really wanted to try to save it, I start looking close. Are there any new growth at all coming out of this plant? And the answer is not really. It's kind of dead and just doesn't know it entirely yet. But what I would do if I wanted to play with it and try to save it is I would trim it back. I would cut off all these flower buds. I would nip back to just above the green growth that's here. Get rid of all the flowers. Get rid of all these flowers are just sucking energy out of the plant. They don't produce any energy. And I would then let it dry out. But then as soon as it needed water again, I would hit this plant with something like a Neptune's Harvest with seaweed and fish emulsion. I just find that the Super Thrive products, any of that, it's the micronutrients. This plant does not need a whole lot of nitrogen and phosphorus. It does need some fertilizer, but the plant kind of needs a little shot in the arm. And I can see in here, there's all little buds trying to come out. So this plant is technically salvageable if I want the challenge. But it's going to take a month for this plant to actually look like something. And this was kind of just an experiment plant for me anyway. But with this particular one here, this is a different story. This still has quite a bit of life left in it. But I wanted to bounce back pretty quick, but I can see because it hasn't been getting fertilizer, and that's another issue that I find with with the rain coming around, is that one, it's diluting out our fertilizers in there. But then I'm never going back and getting more fertilizer on it because I'm trying to let it dry out because we were getting so much rain. And so that becomes the vicious cycle. I need it to dry out, but I also need fertilizer. So sometimes with this particular case, because the plant is relatively healthy, it just, you can see all the dead flowers start. I mean, I don't need to deadhead these plants to keep them blooming because they're sterile. They're not going to produce seed. But it's putting a lot of energy into creating these pods, and I wanted to put all its energy into flushing out. So in this particular case, I'm just going to cut the salvias right out. Pretend they're not even there. I'm just going to cut them off at the ground. Then just come around here and nip these all the way back. I'm not even going to think twice about what I'm cutting and what I'm not cutting. I'm just going to look close, and I'm going to tip back all these pieces, and then I'm going to snip back all the growth back here, and that's going to start flushing out from the inside. The Vermilion doesn't really need a whole lot of pruning. It does need a little shape, but my hummingbirds still love it. They're still visiting, so I don't worry about this particular plant being leggy. But if I wanted to rejuvenate this and make it more compact, I would just go through here and I would tip back every single plant, giving it a buzz cut to make sure that it goes nice and even on all heights. And then go right around the edge from there, nip the whole back, and then I would just give it a good dose of fertilizer and then pay really close attention to making sure that this dries out well in between watering. And this plant will look great in a week. So I hope that helps. That's kind of the protocol I'm using for all the planters. If plants are worth salvaging, cut them back, give them a deep haircut, then give them good bounds of fertilizer. But at the same time, some plants I just find, I've had employees in the past where we were doing container gardens, and I had this one particular employee that we were getting an excessively rainy year, and most of the plants were dying back, and nobody was having a good year. Crops in the fields were rotting. We were just getting too much rain. But one employee just had a really good flourishing crop, and so I asked him what he did, and one of his keys was the Neptune's Harvest with seaweed. And I think the key is the seaweed. Nothing's going to compensate for the damp feet and the plant is just drowning. But There's something in the stimulation. There's something in they call it amino acids, whatever. There's something in seaweed that's kind of like just like a shot of elixir into the arm of the plant. So I use those as supplements. For my planters, I still, for the most part, use the traditional Miracle Grow dispensers. I just find it works well. The Proven Winners are big feeders. They like a lot of food. But I do supplement with the Neptune's Harvest every couple weeks just to give them that little extra micronutrients that they like. No right or wrong, just what's worked for us. And I hope that helps you with whatever challenges you're having, especially if you have tomatoes or vegetables in containers. Pay close attention because we're getting reports of diseases all over the place. But it seems like we're finally drying out. Clear morning today, less rain in the forecast, and that's good for our containers. Hope that helps. Take care.